Michelle Fine. I am chosen family to the Center for Justice. By day, I teach at the Graduate Center, CUNY. Welcome to the 10th anniversary of Beyond the Bars. Was anybody there last night? You just want to shout out some adjectives, verbs, shrieks? What'd you think?
Amazing. Inspiring. Powerful.
Inspirational.
Life-changing. We're never going to be the same. I welcome you to Beyond the Bars. I welcome you to Columbia University. Of course, we stand on land stolen from the Lenni Lenape and stole many times thereafter by gentrifiers, by university. And so we honor whose land this is. We gather just a few miles from a detention center where children have been taken from their families at the southern border. We are across the river from the state I live in, New Jersey, which is flooded with private contracts with ICE and detention center. We're just a few minutes from watching the video of Fitzroy Gale being repeatedly beaten by police in New York City, screaming, "What crime did I commit? What did I do?" before he was pummeled by 8 officers. And we're 36 hours from the assassination of Nathaniel Woods by the state of Alabama. Anybody here a little worried about the virus? So I'm talking about the carceral virus, not the coronavirus. The carceral virus, like the coronavirus, is invisible, and it's everywhere. And it's where we work, and it's in institutions, and it jumps across borders, and some people are more vulnerable than others, and sometimes we have videos to watch them fall. The amazing thing about the carceral virus, however, is that there is a known form of resistance. And that resistance gets born here at Beyond the Bars every year, and this is now a decade's worth of resistance. We know how to stop the virus. Woo woo! So our task today is to do 2 things. First, you are going to participate. There are 3 plenaries across the day. I hear from Kathy Boudin that between the first and the second, you're allowed to stand up and stretch but not move. I think you could pee if you want, but I'm not sure. That we're going to keep it moving. But our first task is to make visible and audible the dangerous flow of the carceral virus, not just in prisons and jails, but in schools, in courts, in hospitals, in childcare facilities, in homeless shelters, in our own homes, on the streets. The second thing we're going to try to discover is how we can be an aggressive form of resistance in the big ways, but in the small ways. As the slow violence of the carceral virus infects your workplace, can you all think about the ways in which the slow violence affects every time we do mandatory reporting? I'm not saying we shouldn't. I am saying every time we call to have a child removed from their home, every time we write up a kid, get him out of a classroom, and there's a cop in the hallway. Each of those acts are the small links that connect what seem like benign institutions to mass incarceration. So today we're going to look hard at the large structural policy racialized dynamics of the carceral state. We're also going to look at the slow violence and how each of us can resist in our workplace and across our settings. All right, so you got 3 plenaries. Can somebody say out loud the ways in which you feel like the carceral virus is in your workplace? Say what? Silence. Racism. Privilege. Louder, louder. Within the nonprofit world. Structurally, but in all of our micro moves too. And I don't want to separate. It's a decade in now. And this conference has been so amazing because it identifies the large structures, but also the small moves we all make just to survive at work, just to not get fired, just to not be a whistleblower. And I don't want to create an opposition between resistance and complicity. I want to assume we're all in both. But I want us to think about how we engage with each other to strengthen our commitment to resistance. So that's our day. Are you up for it? Yes. Before we get any further into the day, I want to invite Dean Begg up to welcome us to Columbia University School of Social Work. The Dean.
Good morning and welcome to Beyond the Bars and the Columbia School of Social Work. As Michelle said, I have the great honor and pleasure of being the dean of this school. And I want to start the day by first acknowledging the tremendous amount of preparation and commitment on the part of the organizing committee for today's events and the entire weekend. Especially the Center for Justice. We're deeply proud that the Center of Justice has a home here at Columbia, and we're very proud of the School of Social Work's role in it. It was founded in 2014 by 3 amazing people, Kathy Boudin, Cheryl Wilkins, and Geraldine Downey. Yes. The center is at the vanguard of criminal justice research, and it engages not just in the scholarship of discovery, but in the scholarship of application, putting knowledge to work for society. Now, as everybody here knows, the Center for Justice is firmly committed to ending mass incarceration and creating pathways to justice rooted in healing, prevention, accountability, and equity. Now, here at the school, in social work, our mission centers on maximizing human well-being and ensuring that everybody can reach their full potential. Our faculty, staff, and students, all of us, commit ourselves to eradicating injustice, alleviating suffering, combating racism, rectifying systemic inequities, and promoting full and fair access to opportunity in all sectors and strata of society. It's clear the mission of the center and the mission of the school are very well aligned. Both promote collaboration across disciplines, across sectors, and across communities. And both value the contributions of diverse perspectives, experiences, and voices, because that's where true innovation comes from. Now, I know a great deal of your discussions at this conference will focus on policy, and that's essential, because it's abundantly obvious that much of human suffering is manufactured by bad policy, by lack of policy. But if we made it, we can fix it. As the country with the highest incarceration rate in the world, we in the United States have much to do. Now, in this room today are the leaders, thinkers, and doers who can and will transform the criminal justice system and end mass incarceration. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Dean Begg. Can we have the first panel up, please? So we could clap now for the first panel, for Kathy, Missy, and Cameron. We're here. So I'm just going to introduce the panel and the moderator, and then I'm going to disappear for a while. Panel is called Challenging a Carceral Society, Vision, Strategies, and Decisions. Are you good?
Yes, I'm good.
I'm going to go sit there, so don't worry about chairs. And our amazing moderator is Nikichi Taifa, founder and chief principal of the Taifa Group. She's a visionary, a seasoned professional with 40 years of experience as an accomplished justice system reform strategist, activist, and scholar. She's a litigator, a lobbyist, an academic, an advocate, a policy analyst, a community activist, a convener, a grant maker, and I would say a mensch. She and I have co-facilitated, and I thank you. It's in your hand.
All right. When I say freedom, you say plans. Freedom! Plans. Freedom! Plans. When I say freedom, you say plans. Freedom! Plans. Freedom! Plans. Yeah. So my name is Nikichi Taifa. Thank you so much. I'm founder and director at the Taifa Group and also convene the Justice Roundtable in Washington, D.C. And I'd like to know how many of you all were here last year at the opening panel, opening plenary, when I talked about the justice movement being a train. I don't know if you were. Yeah, so, we're once again in the right place at the right time with the right conveners. Thank you, Columbia University Center for Justice. And with the right panelists here, we have a phenomenal panel, illustrious, fierce. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. And guess what? We have the right audience in the room, you and those who are in the virtual audience as well. So give yourselves a hand. So what has decades of organizing and research shown us? It has shown us that issues of incarceration and criminalization reach far beyond prisons, jails, police, and the criminal punishment system. It has shown us that we have created a society in which surveillance, criminalization, and punishment, detention, and incarceration have become a primary tool of governance and social control, not just in the United States, but internationally as well. It has shown us that those at the margins, Black people, Latinx people, other people of color, white women, people who are undocumented, people who are LGBTQ, are those that are the most targeted, the most impacted, and that their leadership is and has been central in our collective journey to a just society. Y'all, Beyond the Bars is 10 years old, right, Kathy? 10 years old, as is the book, The New Jim Crow. And as Angela Davis told us last night, that this year, 2020, also marks the 50th year. Can you believe it? The 50th year of her arrest. I'm not sure if it was arrest or the August 7, 1970 Marion County courthouse shooter. So what is it, arrest? Because I know that she wasn't arrested immediately. But we're talking about 50 years. While our movement legacy extends far beyond the last decade, far beyond the past 50 years, in the last 10 years, the movement against mass incarceration has grown significantly. While at the same time, the number of people in jails and prisons in the U.S. has decreased very little. The movement challenging prisons, jails, and police is larger than ever. And yet detention of people who are undocumented has increased. Criminalization of activism is on the rise, and people across the globe are likewise challenging policies and systems of inequality, including prisons and police. The growth of our movement has birthed many possibilities, as well as many challenges. And that's what we're going to dive into this morning. We're going to be surfacing and we're going to be examining critical issues that our movement is currently facing, including differences in vision, differences in strategies, as we further our freedom plans towards transforming the society in which we live. And so I am very humbled to be in the presence of such phenomenal panelists that we have here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to get right into it. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so let's see. Side we're going to start on. Okay, we're going to start with Andrea right here. Andrea James. We're talking about the founder of the National Incarcerated. the National Incarcerated for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, also the founder of Families for Justice as Healing. And we're talking about someone who has been in the criminal justice system in many different capacities for the past 25 years, from her days as a youth worker to her work as a criminal defense attorney to being an impacted person herself. And she brings her experience together to raise awareness about what is happening there. So we're glad to have you with us, Andrea. We also have Danielle Cerrette. We're talking about a rising star here. Everywhere I go, I see your book. I see quotes from you, everything. We're talking about Danielle, who's the executive director of Common Justice, which develops and advances solutions to violence that transform the lives of those harmed and foster racial equity without relying on incarceration. Locally, they operate the first alternative to incarceration and victim service program in the U.S. that focuses on violent felonies in adult court. So welcome, Danielle. And oh my God, look, we're talking about well, you know, we're talking about mover and shaker. Now, let me tell you, the brochure says that you're one thing,
Right.
but I went on the internet and I didn't even know. Let's give it up for Cassandra Federle, the new executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. Can you believe it? DPA has come a long way, y'all. Because I remember DPA back in the day. Congratulations, my sister. My sister! Congratulations. And thank you to DPA for seeing the light and putting a fearless woman of color fearless African-American woman of color at the helm. So Cassandra is the new executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. She works with communities throughout the state. This is what she has doing now. She's going to be doing whatever executive directors do. Okay, but you know, we're talking about someone who has cultivated and mobilized powerful coalitions in communities devastated by drug misuse and drug criminalization, developing municipal strategies to foster healthy and safer communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ABC 1, 2, 3, and also bringing a reparatory justice focus. I got to put that in there, my sister, to these issues as well. So welcome, Cassandra. Oh, Jose! In fact, we just recently brought Jose to Washington, but actually we just day before yesterday, brought Andrea to Washington Justice Roundtable. But Jose Saldana, I mean, thank you, RAP, Release Aging People in Prison. Thank you, RAP. Where's my thing for Jose? He is the director of RAP, Release Aging People in Prison. He was released from a New York State prison himself in 2018 after serving 38 years. You know, 38 years, and four parole board denials. While in prison, Jose earned an associate's degree, founded several important restorative justice and victim awareness programs, has mentored hundreds of men during his years inside, and continues day after day to inspire people with his energy, commitment, and leadership. Thank you for all that you've done and brought to RAP, and thank you for being part of this panel. And last but not least, we're gonna put the white man last. I love you, James Kilgore, because y'all are usually first, aren't they? Aren't they usually first? I love you so much. Thank you for all that you do and for all that you have done and for being uncompromising. James is a writer and educator, a social justice activist, teaches, works at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, spent 6 years in prison. Yes, indeed. You don't even have the South Africa part in here, but one day I want to hear about that story. During which time he drafted his 3 published novels. He is the author of Understanding Mass Incarceration, A People's Guide to the Key Civil Rights Struggle of Our Time, and a whole lot of other things he's written as well, including novels. And we're really glad that we have all of these non-compromising people that are going to share in this discussion. So let's give them all a big hand again. Okay, so where are we? Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to first throw it out to you all and let you all just share a brief overview, about 45 minutes, about your vision, about your mission, your present work, your strategy, how you got there. 5 minutes, y'all. I mean, just kind of like a brief overview. Then after that, I'm going to throw in a few provocative questions for group discussion, and we're going to open up to you all for Q&A after that. Does that sound good? Okay, so we don't have to go in order. We can mix it up. Whoever feels like they want to go in and start, jump right in. Whoever wants to be next. I don't feel I need to, go down. Who wants to kick this off? Who wants to kick this off with your mission, your vision, your strategy, how you got there? Come on, don't speak up at once. Who wants to do it? I know ain't nobody over here shy. There we go. Andrea James, let's give it up.
So, thank you, everybody. It's an honor always to be here. Thank you, Kathy and Cheryl, for helping us to see our vision and to provide us with the platforms to talk about it and to do the work. And Nkechi, thank you. We would not be here but for Nkechi Taifa. When we came home and brought the work that we had started organizing in the prison back in 2010 in the federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, we had a whole lot to say. Michelle Alexander's book had just come out, The New Jim Crow. We heard about this uptick in the need to end mass incarceration. We heard nothing about women. And we were, then Danbury was significantly overcrowded, and we were about 2,000 women crammed head to toe, head to toe, head to toe in a federal prison, and listening on our little clear transistor radios about NPR and the story that was being told about on Democracy Now! About this entity called the American Legislative Exchange Council. And we were like, what the hell? And figuring out, many of them who are now have centered themselves in the arena and dialed us back 25 years from decarceration to prison reform, and we're somehow allowing these people who are the architects of mass incarceration to be at the table with us, which is something I'm still not very clear about, my people. But at the time, in 2010, we were hearing this uptick because ALEC had been exposed. And they had been exposed for all of the architectural work that they had done to get us to this massive place of where we are with so many people who are incarcerated. And we were women sitting in the prison. A lot of my team that's here was in this prison with me, and we were organizing, Taz and Shay and Virginia and I don't know who else, but we were all in this place and trying to figure it out. And really wanted to make sure that we created a platform for women's voices to be heard, to talk about what it's like to be separated from our children, what it's like to not see our children for 6, 7, 8, 10 years, like many of the sisters. I am not the poster woman for incarceration. I served a 2-year sentence. I walked into that prison, and I met some of the most phenomenal women that had been there for decades, that are still part of our core team and doing this work. They have been buried in prisons and have come out and are standing on the front lines to make sure that the issues that we care about, and unapologetically, we focus on ending incarceration of women and girls. A huge goal, a huge goal. And over the years since then, we have tried to figure out how are we going to not step back from that goal, but figure out how are we going to operationalize that goal. And that's a process. That's nothing you can do from a textbook. That's nothing you can do from sitting in a classroom. That's something that you have to be on the ground in your hyperlocal communities, and we're national in name and platform of connectivity only. Every single one of us is attached to our hyperlocal communities on the ground, but we're connecting and sharing resources, sharing work, sharing ideas. And so we did a 2.5-year listening tour from the tiniest places to the largest cities. We went and we talked to women everywhere, and that culminated into a 25 women coalition meeting across the country, turned into a 50 coalition meeting across the country, and then ultimately turned into a town hall meeting that was held in 35 communities across the country. We took all of that information from the most directly affected women, girls, gender nonconforming, LGBTQ folk, and we dumped it all on the table. And we pulled that apart, and we came up with our long-term infrastructure that we call in our roadmap for how we were going to organize ending incarceration of women and girls. We came up with our long-term plan called Reimagining Communities. And yes, Reimagining Communities, we named it that because it's a direct pushback to reimagining prisons. We are tired of reimagining prisons. And we need to bring back some of the money that's extracted for reimagining prisons into our communities, so those of the sisters and the brothers and the children, the babies who are on the ground with us in all of these hyperlocal spaces can do this work. I'll end by just saying we figured it out a little bit. Right now, this is what abolition is. It doesn't look like any little neat package that you can wrap a bow on and say, bam. Abolition is about experimentation. It's about trying things out. What we do know for sure is that the current system isn't working in our benefit. And so we're doing a number of experiments in our hyperlocal communities, from transformative justice being led by the most directly affected women to a number of things we're working. Andrea Ritchie, big shout out to 6Ds until she's free. Something that we sat and hunkered down in a room yesterday and worked through again for the second year in a row, which covers documenting, decriminalizing, diverting, decarcerating, divest and dismantle, and dreaming. And so that in a nutshell, I know I got 5 minutes, is,
You have 1 more minute.
Okay, great, is a lot of really,
I'm gonna stand up when you
okay, perfect.
Yeah, you
It's
go.
a really, it's a lot of hard work, but we broke things down into 4 buckets. One, organizing spaces, hyper-local organizing spaces led by the most directly affected women and girls in the neighborhoods. The second one was campaigns to close, decarcerate, close jails, close prisons, and we started with the smallest. We did a survey, a canvassing of the country, and we figured out where the smallest populations of women, because we can end that. We can disrupt that. We can significantly decarcerate Vermont, for instance. We can end incarceration of women and girls in Massachusetts, for instance. And we got a whole lot of our Massachusetts colleagues up here in the room. We're in the thick of a campaign to end a $50 million plan to build a new women's prison in Massachusetts. And the other buckets are movement lawyering. We have an incredible team of movement lawyers, and we coalition bill with Demos and some other organizations around suing prisons, trying to attack it from all different ways. And then the last piece to that is coalitions, national coalitions to repeal Adoption Safe Family Act. We think about the 1994 Crime Act. What was the most debilitating and disruptive to Black women and their families that began the criminalization of Black women was the Adoption Safe Family Act. So we have a number of coalitions, including an international coalition with Kathy and Cheryl that we're building with women across the globe. A number of primary caretaker coalition, a number of things that we're building with sisters all over the country. And of course, our Clemency Works, our national state clemency campaign. We have subcommittees and state committees across this country to push women out of state prison.
All right, thank you, Andrea. And actually, you did follow the instructions exactly. I did say 4 to 5 minutes, but I forgot I gave you 5 minutes. It's all good. Who wants to be next? Well, how we get the men on this side and the women? Okay. Hey, well, no, I'm on this side too. So okay. Okay, go on, Jose. Take it away.
Okay, my name is Jose Saldan.
Oh, wait.
Sorry.
Okay, so the other side can't see what's on this side because of this big thing.
Can I get
How do
this
you-
mic? I'll stand. Is this mic working?
Testing. I don't know. What about this one?
I don't know. I guess I'll speak loud enough.
Okay, if you could come here, but I will say this, I'm gonna have to be very vigilant because, you know, sometimes you don't want to actually give the mic to someone. You definitely don't want someone to come to when we only have 4 to 5 minutes. So I'm gonna be a bad guy if that's okay. Okay.
Tell me when I got a minute left.
Okay.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for being here, being a part of this. And I just want to just look at the picture on this pamphlet. This is who we are. This is the movement. This is what the movement looks like. And while I was in prison, this is what I envisioned. Being a part of this movement. Being there with people who have an interest in changing this system. Now, we address rap evolved addressing a particular problem created by mass incarceration, the elder population aging, growing old, sick, and dying. And these numbers are devastating. I won't go into the numbers because the numbers don't mean very much to me because I put a face on these men that passed away and the women. We could put a face on this. And what rap has done to change the parole system, the release system that was complicit in mass incarceration, longer sentences in the front end, and in the back end, perpetual punishment, adding layers and layers, years and even decades of more punishment, created this crisis of people dying in prison needlessly. So rap challenged the composition of the parole board. That was the first strategy, and we had limited success, but it was success. And the release rate increased almost double from the 20s to the 40s. And men were being released. Elderly men were being released. But the victory was somewhat hollow because they were being released in walkers, in wheelchairs, being released to die within a few years, and in some cases, to die within a few months. So while that strategy had produced good results, we know that we can maintain this struggle to actually decarcerate using that strategy alone. So we are a part of a national movement that calls for the ending of all life sentences because we believe life sentences are inhumane. Not only are they inhumane, they are being perpetuated by people who had a vested interest in mass incarceration. And they have no moral authority to take hope away, not only from individuals that are incarcerated, but thousands and even millions of families that are impacted by this. So we are part of this national movement, and we believe that this has to be the way to challenge mass incarceration. Critical mass support across the nation. These pictures have to be enlarged by thousands, thousands, and thousands and thousands of more. We are going to Albany on April the 21st. And this picture here was from our last advocacy day. We told the legislators who are not on board yet, who think that the police can put more pressure on them than we could. We told them that we're going to be back. And we're going to keep coming back until we succeed and they're out of office. So we're asking, there's a flyer right there. If you want to have a flyer, register, RSVP, join us. We have our rap volunteers there. They have to sign up with them. Just give them your email address, your contact information so we can stay in contact. We want to bring 1,000 formerly incarcerated people, families of formerly incarcerated people, activists, people who are concerned with decarceration in New York State, because we will not stand for another death. And this is personal for me, very, very personal, that every time I get a phone call and one of my old mentors pass away. Because when I left prison, I made a vow to myself and to my God that I will not go on with my life as if they did not exist. And I want everybody in here that's formerly incarcerated to make that silent vow. Join this movement because loved ones that we left behind will die in prison unless we join this movement and end mass incarceration in New York State at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Jose. Okay, who's going to be next? All right, the new ED, Cassandra Frederic.
Y'all gonna have me staying in my house. So I work at Drug Policy Alliance, and so 5 minutes, vision, present work, how we got here. So DPA has done a lot of different strategies. I think one of the things when we first started was really focusing on how do we end mandatory minimums for drugs, right? That was our focus, right? Like how do we decarcerate people that are in jail for drugs And we ran campaigns on that in New York. Gabriel Saya, who's my mentor, worked with folks here in New York to deal with the Rockefeller drug laws, right? And figuring out how can we remove criminal penalties for, well, how do we get people out, right? Because people had these exorbitant kind of sentences, 12 years to life for, small possession. How do we get them out? How we were doing that in California with Prop 36, treatment instead of incarceration. How do we move people out of it? And how do we get people out? I mean, we were one of the first organizations that was focusing on prosecutors. How can we elect prosecutors that are not committed to the drug war? How do we get them to say that they are against the drug war? We're going to elect them to be prosecutors, right? This was our strategy. Like, how do we stop getting people into jails and prisons, and how do we take them out? And I'm not sure if people know, but DPA right now is supporting a ballot initiative in Oregon around decriminalizing drug possession, right? And this is important because I want to talk about the shift in strategy, which goes to why we are also a part of the 60s until she's free. The current criminal justice frame is around decarceration, which is absolutely important. And the reason why we know that it's around decarceration is because the opposition that now tries to pretend to be the support is galvanizing around this principle of decarceration, right? They don't want to fund you unless the campaign that you have, it decreases the jail beds in jails and prisons. And that is important. But they don't want to fund anything else. And so here's the thing in which we are expanding the frame. Once someone is incarcerated, right, multiple things have failed. And I'm a social worker, and I got taught here, and I don't often say that, or I always say it and say how annoying that it is. One of the things that we were taught was there's a river, right? And social workers are on the bottom pulling babies out the river, right? And there's a bunch of us pulling the babies out. Now, social workers say this because it makes them feel good. We pull them out, and then we put them in another river, but that's a different panel. So we pulling them out. Everybody's like, okay, we're pulling them out. And then some of us are like, well, who's putting the babies in the river? So some of us have to climb around and go up and find out who's putting the babies in the river. And those people are just as important as the people pulling it out. Because we have to figure out, how do we get this entity from putting the babies in the river? And that is the conversation around decriminalization. We have to do the front end work of pushing people out of the road of incarceration in the first place. And that means we have to pay attention to who is doing the criminalizing and understanding how do we identify and document the other carceral actors, the other people that are committed to the carceral system, the other people that are inoculating our communities with the decarceration virus, with the carceral virus. And so the thing for me, and how do we get here, is understanding two things. The middle word in our organization's name is policy. And they also fund a lot of policy. Funders fund policy. They like campaigns. They want to see metrics. They want to know what law, legislation you're going to pass. I want to be very clear. By the time we get to the point where we have to pass a law to affirm the humanity of people, we have lost. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to think, because the legislative process is built on horse trading. So no matter what, we're dealing with Sophie's Choice, no matter what, right? There's no way you get everything out of a structure that is based on controlling us. And so the conversation is, we're not going to get our freedom papers in policy. We're not. And what that means is that our strategy means that there are people that do the policy work, and more people have to be outside building the structures to hold the harm that happens in our community. That's right. And what that also means, and Miriam Kaba has taught me this, is that we can't hold people accountable. Accountability happens within. And that, for me, is and that is the frame that I put on the legislative and policy process. We're not going to force the system or the elected officials to see our humanity and our dignity and the reason why we shouldn't be in these carceral systems in the first place. We have to build that knowledge within our communities, within ourselves, because they're not going to save us. These structures are not for that. And so we cannot ask for accountabilities in a policy structure. We have to ask for accountability within ourselves so that we bond together so we can bring justice for ourselves and build the structures in communities for ourselves. The courts and the legal systems should not deliver our healing because they are not centered on healing. They're not centered on people. They are centered on control and extraction.
Thank you. Woo! So we've heard from Andrea, we've heard from Jose, we've heard from Cassandra. Who's going to be next?
I'll go.
Go on, Danielle, take it away.
Hi. Good morning, you all. Good morning. I'm like, we're going to need all sorts of people to win, including morning people. So I'm very encouraged by all of your presence as someone who isn't one of your kinds. It's a real...
Talking to the microphone better.
Very rarely do people ask me to talk louder. That is not the request. Is that all right? Can everyone hear? So I have the honor of running Common Justice, which develops and advances solutions to violence that meet the needs of people who are hurt, advance racial equity, and don't rely on prison. And at the core of our work for more than a decade, we've been operating the first and still only alternative to prison for serious and violent felonies in the adult system. It means we divert cases like stabbings and shootings and gunpoint robberies into a restorative process where people sit with those they've harmed, make things as right as possible, go through a process that helps transform their relationship to themselves and to violence. And if they do so, not only are not incarcerated, but are left without any felony convictions on their record. At the same time, thank you. At the same time, we work with the people they harmed to support them in coming through what happened to them and in their lives generally. We do this work for a few reasons. First, we know that we will not end mass incarceration unless we take on the question of violence. The first part of that is just numbers. More than half of people locked up are locked up for crimes of violence. You do not get dramatic reductions by ignoring more than half of people. And I want to be clear, too, when people talk about a 50% reduction as a bold and audacious goal, I think our dreams are far too small. By my best estimate, the day I was born, there were 443,850 people locked up in the U.S. There's more than 2.3 million today. That means a 50% reduction concedes a threefold increase in my lifetime, which, despite the opinions of the adolescents I work with, is not actually all that long. So we do not have to envision a brave, brand new world to get to that level. We have to be able to remember the late 70s. And there are some of us elders among you all who can help with that. The other reason we steer into the question of violence is that it's not just numbers. We know the reason that America chooses prisons over schools and prisons over roads and prisons over hospitals and prisons over anything that would nurture our well-being is because we have told a story about some imagined monstrous other, somebody who is so different from us that we need to be protected from them at any cost, any financial cost, any moral cost, any human cost. That story is as old as this country and as racist as this country. And until we get at that story, no matter how we trim the edges, we will not uproot the tree. Like, I am not actually terribly good at caring for my houseplants, but what I know from others who are is that very often the things that grow best have been pruned on the sides, right? The things that die are the things that are taken by the root. And the root of mass incarceration in this country fundamentally is racism and white supremacy, and is the way that racism and white supremacy informs our story of violence, even in a nation that is founded on genocide committed by white people, on incarceration and degradation carried out by white-led governments. Even in that context, our story of violence is one that tells a story as though Black people and violence are somehow equivalent. And until we reckon with that story, until we correct it, And until we do the labor of correcting the harm that we have caused as a nation, as a people, until we white people do the work of our accountability for the pain we have inflicted, there will not be a way forward for us. I've often compared the gains we've made thus far to like when corporations or cities do settlements where they'll pay out a ton of money, but on the condition that there's no admission of wrongdoing. It's like our changes in this country are like, okay, we'll do everything from the Voting Rights Act to our changes in marijuana policy in New York, so long as we do not have to say why we did it, and so long as we do not have to repair it. I believe we have squeezed the last drop out of that strategy. I think Barack Obama and his beautiful family, down to that little dog Bo we all miss, were the last thing we could get out of a strategy that did not require us to tell the truth about the past. And then the very last thing I see, because I see you standing, I'm like, I grew up in Chicago, I still got good peripheral, is that the work, I get asked a lot whether I'm an abolitionist, and the thing I believe, the answer is yes, but spoiler alert, but the thing I believe is that you don't actually have to hate prisons to be a prison abolitionist. You have to hate violence. And as a violence abolitionist, my job is to identify all of the places in my culture that are generative of violence and to eradicate them one by one. That means the first things I eradicate are things like structural inequities. But if I am honest and I look for the sources of violence, I will see prison as one of those sources. And I will eradicate it not only because I oppose prison, but because I want to be safe and I want those I love to be safe. And so we have to stop seeding the idea that safety belongs to our opposition and freedom belongs to us. They are both ours.
Ashe. Thank you. All right, James. Follow that one up.
I'm leaving. That's too hard to follow, but thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to talk about, on May 10th of 2009, I was released from prison out of Parole to Illinois. And I was obviously very...
Need the mic.
Oh, is this not on?
I have no idea.
Is it working?
One, try. Testing. Oh, yeah.
Let me start over. Don't stop that clock. On May 10th, 2009, I was paroled out of California prison to Illinois to be with my family. Obviously, I was very happy. The next day, a cheery middle-aged white woman showed up and put an electronic monitor on my ankle. And the next day, my parole agent phoned me and said, "You'll be allowed out of the house Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. You should be able to take care of all your affairs during that period." And suddenly, my idea of what freedom looked like changed. So from that moment, I began asking questions about these electronic monitoring devices. Who's making the rules? Who's making the money? And where are these devices going in the future? And when I told people I was doing research on this at that point, people were saying, "Hey, it's better than prison, isn't it?" And I said, that's the wrong question. Compare it to freedom, don't compare it to prison. And so it took a while, but all of a sudden, when we started having talk about decarceration and talk about alternatives to incarceration, the knee-jerk reaction was, put people on electronic monitoring, put them on house arrest, and that's going to solve the problem. But as the experience of electronic monitoring accumulated, as we saw particularly what was happening in black and brown communities for people who are coming home, for people who are on pretrial, for youth, and for immigrants, we saw that these electronic monitoring devices were creating new prisons. In their living rooms, in their communities, geofences, digital redlining, e-gentrification, all of these things are uses of this technology to punish people, to confine people, and to reproduce the dynamics of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex with the technology in a new way. And don't get me wrong, these are not replacing cages. As Danielle has said, as other people have said, we still got 2 million people in cages. We're getting more people in technological cages in communities, and that's what I'm trying to address in the work that I'm doing with Media Justice and other people. Our hashtag, I'm not that good with hashtags, but our hashtag is no digital prisons, challenging incarceration. So what we've been doing is we've been challenging people's notions of alternatives. What do you fight for when you're fighting for decarceration? When you're fighting for pretrial justice? When you're fighting for the conditions of people who have been released from prison? In Illinois, we put forward a bill to get rid of electronic monitoring for everybody who had completed their prison sentence. We had people who had done 20, 25 years coming home and then being put on house arrest for a year, 2 years, not allowed out of their house, only allowed out of their house Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's supposed to be freedom. They're supposed to put their life back together in that time. It's impossible. So we've worked a lot with people who are fighting for decarceration, trying to find ways to push back against the use of electronic monitoring, trying to target the companies that are making money off this. Guess what? It makes a lot of money. Guess who's the biggest profiteer in this? It's the GEO Group, the world's biggest private prison operator. So we must target these people, and we must stop them from spreading their new look technology, their carceral humanism. Now they're pretending that they're caring. They have GEO has a division called GEO Care. They pretend that they care. They care by shackling you. They care by putting shackles on people coming across the border. And I want to show the most dynamic example of the way this is being used happened in Mississippi last August in a factory where 650 ICE agents raided factories in Mississippi and detained 680 workers. And how did they find them? They found them because they all had GPS devices, and they tracked them not only because they were working and they didn't have permits, but because they were doing labor organizing in those factories. So they were using it as a vehicle against dissidents. So I have one last point because I see you standing up, and I better shut up, huh? Okay. So I just want to quote one of the heroes from my era, because sometimes this all seems overwhelming, like we can't possibly deal with it. But Huey P. Newton told us, when telling us about the liberation struggle of the people of Vietnam, the spirit of the people is greater than the man's technology. And we have to believe that if we're going to win. People in LA got rid of predictive policing. 10 million immigrants live under the radar, and they manage to survive, build communities, raise their families, and send money back home. We must smash digital prisons and incarceration.
Thank you. The spirit of the people is greater than the man's technology. Thank you. So thank you very much, everyone. Each of you all have a specific focus area, and you've you've mentioned it. I think that's the beauty of this panel. But as a result of having to focus on a certain issue area, like Jose, elders, Andrea, women and girls, Cassandra, the drug war, decriminalization, James, incarceration, Danielle, victims change the narrative with respect to violence. As a result of that, sometimes there is a concern that a singular focus could have a danger of being possibly counterproductive to work that other people are advancing. If we're looking at them in isolated lanes as opposed to a symbiotic whole, shall we say. I know there were issues with respect to people organizing around the death penalty versus life without parole, and issues in terms of juvenile life without parole versus elder life without parole, issues in terms of the short range vision and the long range view. I just want to kind of open it up to just a conversation amongst us. How do we protect against throwing groups under the bus, shall we say? How do we protect against advancing the lane that we're in, but making sure that we're not unconsciously or unintentionally doing harm to other people who are in other lanes? And feel free to push back even with respect to the question that I raised, but I kind of hear this from time to time, and I just wanted to see what you all's perspectives are. Cassandra.
Well, I feel like I definitely have to answer this question because our work and our movement around drug policy created the really sustaining narrative that justice was only to be afforded to the nonviolent drug offender. the collective we of drug policy, and now this is weird being the new executive director having to apologize for white libertarians, but here I am. We did that, and it has been helpful in elevating the conversation around the criminal justice system and how it doesn't work, and it has been incredibly damaging for shutting the door behind other people and creating and reinforcing the idea and the monster that some people are scarier than others. And we've also done that within our movement because we've focused rightly on people who use drugs at the expense of people who sell drugs, right? And all of that is mixed into race. And I part of the reason why I had to jump to answer the question is because when I first started at DPA, we were going around to other groups to like build like our coalition, and we went to a particular place, and I was new, so I'm just like there with my director writing notes, and we're talking to someone, and immediately I just knew that this person wasn't rocking with us, right? And I was just like, damn, I'm not sure. I'm glad I'm not leading this meeting because I don't know what we're supposed to say. And it was like 45 minutes of the person basically telling us how we've thrown their clients under the bus, how our messaging and our narratives are super dangerous and are not helping everyone, and that we actually have to be responsible for the harm that we've caused. And, you know, we're not gonna move forward if we're not accountable to that. And that we actually have to figure out how we can be in the same space as people that work on different issues. And that conversation was super, it was a moment that I come back to often, and the way that I measure my words and my work across multiple issues. And this has happened multiple times. Immigration allies have come to us and been like, whenever the drug war does really well and you guys are fighting back, the immigration work really pushes back, right? Because your work is not inclusive of that. But the person that really put that lesson for me, which was like back in 2010, is sitting right next to me, right? And she has been unabashedly an honest partner in the way that we do our work and the harm that could come. And because we have thrown people that have committed harm under the bus in order to push the conversation of drugs. So even in the context of abolition, when I talk to my friends that are not a part of the movement, they're like, yeah, abolition, I get it. For people that use drugs, yeah, they shouldn't go to jail. But people that kill people, you gotta bury them under the jail. And I'm always like, okay, let's talk about that. But I'm also recognizing that as someone that works on drug policy, how is my work furthering that as well? And I think for us, you know, now we're talking about people who sell drugs, and for us, that's part of the way for us to get into the conversation about the messy part of our work. But yeah, Danielle was a great accountability partner around that.
So before I turn over to Danielle, I just want to say, Cassandra, thank you so very much. There's another quote from Amilcar Cabral: tell no lies, claim no easy victories. And in fact, after we finish this thread, I was going to follow up with what you said, because I was around during those days as well. And we did we ourselves painted ourselves into that first-time nonviolent drug offender corner. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit. I want to hear what everyone else. So Danielle, you go on and take that away.
Thank you. I'll say something about why, apart from like the depth and clarity of her accountability, why Cassandra and I are still friends after that conversation. And I think we make a mistake in conflating the necessity of compromise in policy with a necessity of compromise in narrative. And let me be really clear what I mean by that. Policy is the realm of compromise. It's disgusting. It's nasty. Like, don't walk through a field of shit in your white boots and then be like, ew. Like, it's not for the purist. It is not for the light of heart. It is, even if we were to pass abolition and reparations tomorrow, if we didn't also manage like capitalism and climate change, it would still be incremental. Like, it is not the realm for the pure. And so what we do in policy work is we identify what is winnable to get people free or well, and we win it. And we do that, and every person's freedom that we secure matters, period. That's the truth. that requires compromise. Like, it is not the case when Rockefeller was won that they could have also won for murder but chose not to, right? Like, there are times where the things that are within our reach are limited still. That is partly because of where we are culturally in terms of building our collective power. We do not want to leave those limited wins on the table, because those people who are inside are our people and we are responsible to them, and to have them rot in prison so we can be super pure and have a cooler hashtag, to my mind, is shameful, period. That said, that does not mean that the way we win has to be on the backs of others. Right? It does not mean that the story we tell has to be a story of contrast. We do not have to say don't lock up people for drugs, because then they'll be in there with those truly dangerous ones who will make them evil through sheer proximity. We don't have to say the second half of that sentence. We can say do not lock people up for drugs because it makes no sense. We don't have to say don't lock children up because they're still kids and they're still vulnerable, not like those adults who had their chance to change and didn't take it. We can just say don't lock up the children because they're our children. Right? And so policy will be compromised all the time. Like, I'm on this panel with Jose Saldana, one of the least compromising people we know, and they have aging in their title, which is a compromise. Like, I'm sure they're not like, actually, we would love young people to stay locked up. They're like, we really only about them elders, right? Like, it's not, we want everybody free. We make strategic decisions to get our people free. But what we need not do ever is compromise on the narrative, throw one another under the bus, pass policies that make the next win harder rather than easier, pass policies where we, in that horse trading, we do something that causes harm to get the benefit we're obtaining. Those things are off the table, but that's different from incremental reform. The place we have not held the line is in how we talk about who we're fighting for and how we want to get them free. And that's a line I don't believe we have any excuse to cross and compromise.
So before I throw it to Jose, actually, as you respond to this, I wanted you to also respond to, as a non-compromising issue dealing with no carve-outs, et cetera, what do you say to people who say if you backed off your position, if you compromise, maybe more people will be let out of prison? So put that into part of what your response is going to be.
Well, first, let me just say we're to release aging people in prison, and let me just tell you that. Let me just tell you that when I first went to prison, I had an Angela Davis afro. This was working? You hear me now? Yeah. When I first went to prison, I had a huge afro. I aged in prison. Aging, something everybody does. Now, let me just say, we advocate for 2 bills, and we believe this is a moderate approach to taking a serious bite out of mass incarceration. And the most controversial bill is the elder parole bill, which provides that if someone is 55 years old and has served 15 years, that this person will automatically be entitled to a parole review. It doesn't matter what the sentence was imposed by a judge, and it doesn't matter what the crime of conviction is. And we say we are uncompromising in them 2 aspects, that the crime of conviction, and most people want us to exclude cop killers, exclude sex offenders, and exclude dudes doing life or women doing life without parole. Now, we can't do that. First, we were founded by formerly incarcerated people. And we are based, our principal decision is based on history. We as people of color, African descent, indigenous people, Puerto Ricans, Chicanos, Mexicans, we have systematically been deprived of every opportunity in this land. We weren't given the right to vote. We were excluded from voting, excluded from pursuing higher education, excluded from economic opportunities. We were marginalized as a people. So we can't, in principle, exclude anybody that's incarcerated from parole justice. Now, but we've evolved. This was a young organization. We evolved because now our mission is to end all life sentences for everybody and put a cap of 15 years on it for every single incarcerated person across the United States.
Okay, thank you so very much. Andrea, women and girls. That's a specific lane. Does that mean you're not concerned about men in prison? Talk to us.
Let me tell you something. Again, we unapologetically advocate for the end of incarceration of women and girls. And we do that work from an abolitionist framework. Abolition includes everybody. And just so we could be clear, our elders, when we were up in Highlander, our elders from SNCC told us that there are no real true youth. There are only elders and future elders. We work from a prison. The common thread at the National Council are women and girls who have had the experience of being on a prison bunk. It's not race. It's that experience. However, we work within an abolitionist framework that includes everybody, and we center our work from the starting place of the liberation of Black women. And the way that we structure our work as women, focusing on women, and Angela said this last night about one of the things that was not addressed in the 60s and 70s was a gender analysis, and the absolute importance of having a gender analysis. And it's important for us to have that space, because many of the issues that we cared about that we didn't hear about as incarcerated women, even shout out to Tina Reynolds and to the sisters that have been on the ground talking about women and children and separation and ending shackling and all of the inhumane, barbaric things that happen, the rape and everything that happens to women during incarceration, prior to incarceration, from baby girls that lead us to a prison bunk. Without that gender analysis, though, there is a huge piece of us missing. We cannot show up to the table as formerly incarcerated women and sit across the table in a space where it might not be that man, but it is a man that is very similar, that helps, that churns up some angst in us, some trauma in us. We can't bring our full selves to this work unless we are able to heal amongst ourselves and to be able to have the camaraderie and the sisterhood and the gender analysis that we every damn day have to bring into the space to pull back somebody who is not trying to respect the voice and the power of women. Women are in line right now in every prison, men's prison across the country, with babies, grandmothers, wives, sisters, aunties. That is not the lineup that we see in women's prisons. We have got to be able to have a platform and a space to address the gender analysis, but to also help to empower ourselves to continue this work. We're holding this. We were holding this before we became the most incarcerated population uptick in the country. We were holding down the increase in incarceration of our men. We have kept our families together. We have been over-criminalized, and goddamn it, we're going to have a space, and we unapologetically advocate on behalf of women and girls.
When I say free, you say her. Free! Free! When I say free, you say her. Free! Free! And we're going to turn to James. James, you say decarcerate. I know. Oh, that was kind of, okay.
James gets it too. Come on, James, show your t-shirt.
But James, hey, that's what, when you say decarcerate, not decarcerate, incarcerate, in incarceration charge, it sound, I even wrote down your quote, it sounded really good. We need to compare it to freedom, not compare it to prison. I was right there on it. But my question, I just need you, as you answer this thing that everyone else has been answering, just delve just a little bit deeper, because you spent 6 years. What if someone had life without parole and were given the opportunity for e-carceration, again, prison without walls, but prison instead. I mean, what would you say to, you know, I mean, I like that. Don't compare it to prison. Compare it to freedom, but they ain't free. So help us out here.
I tell them to go on the monitor.
Let me say that again.
I tell them to go on the monitor. And why would I tell them that? Because, and I think Danielle's making the point, what we fight for, we can't apply it in each and every individual case, right? We can't, I'm not going to tell someone, well, you shouldn't go out because electronic monitoring is bad. Your decision is to decide what's best for you in the context within which you make that decision. You can't control, you don't have the option of going out without the bracelet. God, I said the word, that's the B word. It's shackle, ankle shackle. You don't have the option of going out there without the shackle. If you do, obviously you should take that. So what we recommend at an individual level isn't what we fight for, you know, in the policy space. And I mean, I've heard that every time we try to tackle the issue of e-carceration and electronic monitoring, we get that response. Well, I had a brother who blah blah blah, and he wanted to be with his kids. Well, of course, you know, but the point is we have to recognize it as a form of incarceration, and we have to push back against it. And I just want to, if I can throw in one other thing, and that is that I think the complexities of this have also surfaced a lot in dealing with issues of gender-based violence and domestic violence. And I want to give a shout out to Monica Cosby and Christy Puckett-Williams, who have helped us evolve our perspective on this in terms of, because we've had a lot of anti-domestic violence advocates who some people might label carceral feminists, who have said, well, you're protecting victims because this electronic monitoring helps protect the safety of victims of domestic violence, survivors of domestic violence. But you know, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a little bit more complicated about what do those devices do. When you use those devices, it prompts a police response, and how does that police response differ for black women and for you know, more upper middle class white women who have a very different relationship with the police and whose family members have a different relationship with the police. So what that triggers us to think is we need to have more complicated solutions to domestic violence than coming up with a piece of technology.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up my next question with just a little quick story. And it's the story of a young lawyer in 1993 walking the halls of Congress trying to get legislators to understand that the federal death penalty should not be expanded, that the 3 strikes law was a bad idea, that trying 13-year-olds as adults was ridiculous, that the disparity in penalty between crack and powder cocaine needed to be changed, that the habeas corpus and the exclusionary rule were important, and that states should not be incentivized with money to build more prison, and that it was ridiculous to eliminate Pell Grants, Pell educational grants for prisons. And that young lawyer helped to mobilize a coalition which talked about some positive things, such as the Racial Justice Act that deals with racism and application of the death penalty, the elimination of the crack powder, elimination of all mandatory minimum sentences, and in an attempt to placate the opposition, called for money for cops as a carrot to try to get them to pass other things. We said, well, we'll go on and throw them something. Yeah, y'all know that lawyer in 1993 was myself. Well, guess what happened? Not only did we not get any of the things we wanted, but they got everything they wanted. The Pell Grants elimination, 13-year-olds as adults, the 3 strikes, evisceration exclusionary rule, mandatory minimums, didn't address the crack powder disparity, and more money to states to build more prisons, and 100,000 new cops on the street. So my question to everyone is, if you knew then what we know now, okay, would you have made similar types of decisions? We learned from our mistakes. We thought that we were trying to negotiate, okay, or something along those lines. But only thing that came out of that was they adopted the bad thing, the one bad thing that we put in to try to placate, and we're still living with the consequences of that now. We're still living with the consequences of the first-time nonviolent drug offender, because what we tried to do, we got to look at history. In those days, there was no difference, none, between Democrats and Republicans on criminal justice issues. Those were the days when the candidate Clinton left the campaign trail to oversee the execution of a mentally challenged person on death row in Arkansas. You know, those were the days when we had to bring the NAACP kicking and screaming into dealing with anything other than racism in the application of the death penalty. So we felt that the only thing we could do was to try to lift up the human face. And we tried, like the Rosa Parks situation, to lift up the human face that seemed palatable and say, not the black woman who had been promiscuous before, whatever, and sat on butts long before Rosa Parks did, but someone who would be acceptable. We put forth our poster child, Kimber Smith. Okay, and they loved it. And as a result, we got the Second Chance Reentry Bill passed in 2008. As a result, we got the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the disparity between crack and powder cocaine in 2010. As a result, we got a lot of different things, but we were still stuck in that corner of having thrown, not intentionally, not consciously, okay, throwing other groups under the bus, but they held up what we gave them on a silver platter. And we have not been able to, other than the work that everyone here is doing right now, to be able to work out something. So I want to just throw that out. If you knew then, or now it's then, okay, you know, should we be talking about just straight up, you know, and, you know, abolition? Where are we with respect to the continuum? And how can we continue on the continuum towards our ultimate goal without painting ourselves into corners and letting them take what they want to take and then leave us with everything else? I'm just throwing it out there. Who wants to take it? There you go, Andrew. Take it away.
And I'm sure there's, with all the brilliant people on this thing, I just want to say this. We, you know, just went through the whole thing about the gender analysis, unapologetically advocating on behalf of women and girls. We held the line and refused to be in support of the First Step Act because the car votes consisted of 75% Black and Latino men, right? I was in prison in 2010 when the Fair Sentencing Act, thanks to the hard work of Nkechi Taifa, passed. It was not, however, because of Congress made retroactive. So at that time, I knew what it was like to be in a prison cram full of women who could not get any benefit from that crack disparity being changed because they were serving mandatory minimum as opposed to a sentencing guideline sentence. That was painful. That's heartbreaking to see. And by the time the First Step Act came along, guess what still in the beginning wasn't included in that? We fought for that. We had to fight. And we at the National Council, we were maligned because we refused, and word was sent into the federal prison to our sisters that we didn't care about getting them free. And we had to fight to get the truth out about why we were standing our ground against the First Step Act. But we did ultimately get that in, so that what was then over 7,000 in 2010, and now was down to 2,600 people that could benefit from this in some tiny way, finally did get an opportunity. But these are the things that we hold on to when we're making these decisions. And it's why we came up with our overarching long-term work called Reimagining Communities. Do we not? We helped to write the Dignity Act. The sisters in the federal prison. Let me be very clear about who wrote Dignity.
Tell it.
The women inside of the federal prison, 8 times we went back and forth to the prison and to Booker's office shaping that bill. Thanks to many women who brought us into that space like Nicole and the Sentencing Project and Nkechi and Jesselyn and Sakira Cook. Black women lawyers who made sure that the women who the bill was about had an opportunity to weigh in on it. We carried that water for those sisters inside of that federal prison. They wrote that bill. And I'll end here. I'm just trying to make a point that as we continue to try and pay attention and bring relief to our sisters who are still inside, we also know that this system is not going to change, and that we have to do the work from within our communities to try and disrupt what's happening to our people, and thus reimagining communities.
All right, thank you very much. And Danielle, go on and let's hear your views on this.
So I've said a lot about our steering into the issue of violence, and so I'm not going to repeat it, but I want to talk about 2 mistakes that I think we made then that we keep making and that we have to correct. The first mistake is that we believed that advocacy in the absence of organizing would be enough. And advocacy is great at securing short-term gains. It is not good at defending those wins. And it cannot pivot. Like, as an advocate, you get your thing and they're like, I gave you your thing, go sit down for 5 years. When you have an organized base, like when you build power, you get to demand the thing that you want next because you, as the people, are their employers and can fire them. And so my friend and mentor, Lorenzo Jones, often says, you don't win because you're right, you win because you're strong. Right? And so we do a lot of work, and that little child just put her fist up. Yes. Beautiful. That's right. Yes, please. We are not, as long as we continue to rely on advocacy as the way we win without investing in base building efforts that build collective power, we will win smaller things. Those wins will not be defensible, and we will be constantly spending all of our energy trying to defend the things we won 3 years ago instead of winning the things that we know could be ours. The other mistake I think that we made, and I referenced this in the opening, is that we have ceded the ground about who crime victims are to our opposition. So I would ask folks in the room, if you or someone you love have been harmed by violence, could you raise your hand? And if you believe that prison will not solve that pain, could you keep your hand up? We have for so long allowed the story of who survivors are to be a story of primarily white women who want more prison. And we cede that ground. We talk about the exclusion of victims' voices as though that will protect our interests, like all of those things. Like, our movement is made of people who have survived harm. And so the moral authority to define what responses to violence should look like is our shared moral authority. And so as long as we continue to try and diminish harm, pretend it's not that bad, say it wasn't that deep, which we know isn't true, which as we say those things, we still go home that night having advocated that and can't sleep through the night because of our nightmares from our own trauma. Like, we know it's not right until we stand in our own moral authority based in our experience and take back that moral terrain. I don't think we'll win further.
Okay, thank you. So I want to see if any other panelists want to respond to that. And then I want to open it up for Q&A. So think about your questions or comments.
I just
Go
want
on.
to make a brief comment. A very good friend of mine who's languished in prison now for going on 47 years, he coined this statement: "We are our liberators."
That's right.
And this is what it boils down to. You know, right now, we allow people to define what justice is. And they define justice as revenge. So we have to define these things for ourselves, because in the end, that's who's going to be harmed by this. So justice has to mean something other than revenge for us. And it's not for one group to define justice. We have to come together and define justice, and then we're going to uncompromisingly fight for that definition to be a reality. And that's my lessons from history is that we fail. Whenever we have disagreements, we fail to come together and hash out those disagreements. Because we have commonality in history, we have commonality in our present predicament. So if anyone can come together, it's us. And that's, to me, that's the most important lesson I've learned from the history of the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, is that we fail to accept concrete, critical criticism and build from it.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes. I don't know if Cassandra or James, you want to, but let's open it up. Let's see. Okay, Taz. Now, do we have a mic? Good, we have a microphone going around. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say,
Introduce yourself, please.
my name is Justine Moore, aka Taz. I am a co-founder member of the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and I am the director of training. I just want to say this, that every step that we take is a learning step. You know, Nikichi, when you did what you did and you was fighting for us that was inside, because I was one of those women that law passed, and because it said no retroactivity and no mandatory minimum, I was still left in the prison for a few years after that. But that was not your fault. That was because you did not know. So as we move on in this movement, everything from our past is a lesson. And the things that we know that we've learned from the past, we use that to better the movement. And as James said, each one teach one. We have to learn from our mistakes and do not let the history define where we are going, and know that this is a movement, and also know that this system is not broken. This system is built and ran the way it was supposed to be. This is what they wanted it to be. So we have to know that we can't fix this system, but we can change our communities. As my executive director says, and my friend and my sister, hyper locally, one block at a time. In your area, you fix that. So that way, reimagine your communities is a big thing. This system works because this is how they want it to work.
So thank you so much for that, Taz. I just want to correct something. No, we absolutely knew what was happening in 2010 when the crack law passed. We knew, in fact, not only did we know, I'm going to be very honest, we knew nothing would see the light of day if we even breathed the retroactivity word. I'm telling you. I'm just saying the timing, the little bit of reform that we got, reform, not revolution, in terms of the 18-to-1, et cetera, was only because we kept retroactivity off the table, because it would have been the complete automatic immediate death knell. Now the question is, should we have been uncompromising as RAP, been unflinching as women and girls, and not allow the little reform that they, that's what the question is, and that's what I still grapple with today. But I will say this, it did serve as a public education tool. It did serve so that when 10 years later, 7 years, whenever it was, when the daggone First Step Act, as Andrew was saying, that did not have any sentencing whatsoever, because we had seeded that issue of retroactivity during those ensuing years, we held out with you. I'm talking about Justice Roundtable, most of the groups are Justice Round, and it was only because of that held out, led by the directly impacted people, that we got the little bit of retroactivity that was part of it. So we didn't know where the mistake was earlier was. What we did not know much earlier was that cops thing. We were so naive to think that if we talked about the elimination of mandatory minimums, if we talked about all these positive things that we want, if we throw in just a little bit of something that might placate them, then we could get, that's where the stupidity was. I mean, I'm just saying. But we were very clear with the Fair Sentencing Act. With respect, whether it was right or wrong, we were very clear with respect to our strategy and what we were doing. Okay, I just want to say that. Thank you. Dara, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dara Baldwin. I'm Director of National Policy for the Center for Disability Rights. And I just want to say something for my disabled folks and who are in prisons and very rarely brought up in these conversations. But I also want to thank my sisters at the council who do bring it into the work, and all of you who do. And I just also want to publicly say thank you, Andrew, for what you're saying about those who oppose the First Step Act. This is a very rare known thing. It was Black women. The groups that sent in their letters of opposition to First Step Act were 6 Black women, so you know. The council, Just Leadership, right, Deanna Hoskins, Reverend Alexander sitting here, the National Council of Churches. HRW is run by Nicole Austin Hillary, which is a Black women's group. The Movement for Black Lives is mostly Black women, yeah, and myself. I was the first one, because that bill did nothing for disabled folks in jail, in prisons. Did absolutely nothing. In fact, it's harming because they have no value. They cannot get good time. And 7,000 to 2,000 is a number. And the work that I work with, ADAPT, you all know us. We took over Mitch McConnell's office to save the ACA. We don't compromise. And we have to learn to do that. And I do national federal policy every day. I'm a federal registered lobbyist. Please pray for me. Because what you said is true. Policy is ugly, and it is nasty. And we as progressive have got to stop being kind and nice to these folks. Those days are over. My question to you all, because also in our space is only 2, 3 Black folks. Nicole is here, and Breon is here, and the Reverend's here. That's about all of us, right? 10, 20, maybe. How do we get some more people of color, some more abolitionists? I am, and I let them know. I'm a federally registered lobbyist, and I'm an abolitionist. I don't care. I'm up here. You gonna stop harming my people. But it's only some of us, and we need to know how more. When are you gonna incorporate that? And we wanna partner with you. You have to come to the federal. You have to come to DC.
Okay, thank you, Dara. And I think, I thought the mic, okay. Okay, you take the mic. Yeah. Introduce yourself, thank you.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Shy. I guess I'm a brand new executive director of my own nonprofit.
What's the name of your nonprofit?
It's named FIST, stands for Fighting Injustice, Standing Together. And I focus on women in the Maryland prison system in Jessup. So my question is, well, my nonprofit started off as an internship while I was an undergrad. And I started teaching the women poetry and stage presence in the women's prison. And I built this rapport with the warden and everybody in there. But then as I started talking to the women, I realized that a lot more work needed to be done. And so I took my work outside as well. And so now we have a lot of work going on the outside, but we also have this work going on inside. And I realized like I'm walking this thin line of like power and control and everything like that. And so like, well, like I really want to get my hands dirty and I want to just dive in. If I could like free all these women, I would, right? But I realize like I know that I can't do that. So I'm trying to figure out like the right way of getting my hands dirty, right? But still allowing myself to like do the work that I'm doing in the prison and having direct access to the women.
Okay, what I want to do is listen to what her question was, how to right way get her hands dirty and still do what she's doing in prison. Let me just hear the other questions, and then you all just have, because we got to close out. This will be your closing remarks, and try to be responsive if you can. Okay, so just real quick. Oh, Nicole, introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Porter with the Sentencing Project. So I just wanted to pull it back out to a strategy question. So we're in New York, where the incarceration rate was substantial between when the state peaked in the late 90s to the mid 2000s. Huge win. A lot of people got out of prison. And yet we're in New York City, we're stop and frisk, took hold, and in some ways, police powers substantially increased, and we can get into the weeds on why both happened at the same time. So both things were true during the same time period. So Nikichi, just I'm pulling back to the story you told when you were walking the halls of Congress and when you all, proposed a bunch of recommendations that didn't get adopted, and yet 100,000 more police got funded and out on the streets. There is this underlying issue where we can be depopulating prisons and yet expanding police power. That might not be something that we can get into in the few minutes we have left, but I think clearly that's a story in New York. Mm-hmm. That was a story in some ways, from the story you told from the early 90s. And that is a question that this work has to grapple with and will need to grapple with in the future.
Thank you, Nicole. Andrea, I think you had a question. Let's do it real quick because you all just going to have a half a minute, 30-second response.
I just want, this is actually more of a comment than a question.
Okay, make it quick.
Coming from the National Council of Churches, there is nothing more institutionalized and debilitating than the church. But we also, when I enter these rooms, also as an advocate, I am an activist policy advocate. And so when I walk into the room, I do go in and say, I want God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And I'll negotiate down from there. And I think that there are times when, and I am happy to say that in these partnerships that I've decided, especially on this area of this system, my leaders and my partners and people I make decisions with are people who are directly impacted. So actually what I'm saying is I'm inviting partnership. I want people, in our partnership, the National Council of Churches are mainline white denominations, historical black churches, and Orthodox churches, okay? So the language has to change. We have to communicate to our people and talk about what can happen and not just what we know, what we want to happen and not just what can happen.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to hear, folks, because I think it's important to hear from the community. So thank you. Just like 30-second concluding. We're supposed to end at 5 after. Just be real brief, but let's hear something concluding. Who wants to start? It's up to you. Let's go on and pop it out. Come on, pop, 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 pop.
Let me just say real briefly to Nicole's issue. You know, I just don't see that, you know, inviting law enforcement to the table. I can't, they serve no purpose. We know the purpose that they serve. We can't, we invite them to the table, we are actually limiting the conversation.
Okay, that was a good pop. Who's next?
So I would
Danielle.
say we've talked a lot about abolition, and I think that runs through these questions. And I would say we have to stop conceiving of abolition as a project about destroying things and understand it as a project about building things. We build the world we want, and then we build the power to secure that world. And so anytime we're in a framework of like, how much can we shrink? I think we have to always also be asking, how much can we grow? One of my mentors growing up in Chicago used to say, it's really hard to get people to fight for a shit sandwich easy on the shit. Right? We have to start fighting for the things that nourish us, even as we do the really deliberate and critical work of shrinking the things that cause harm.
Thank you, James. Take it away. Thank you, Danielle.
I want us to think a little bit more about how we build organization. What does an organization look like? People are saying advocates can't do it alone. The National Council is trying to build a national organization. What does it look like to have an organization that can act at a national level and act at a local level and have structures of accountability? There's lots of models, lots of things to look at, but I don't think we give enough emphasis to thinking about how we build organization. We react more to policy and issues.
All right, Cassandra.
I think to Nicole's point, we cannot focus solely on decarceration. We need to focus on the 6 Ds that Andrea laid out. And one of the things that I would say is the way that you get depopulating the prisons but expanding the police force is by acting like that criminalization is not the thing we're fighting. We're not fighting incarceration. We're fighting criminalization, the idea that people are less than, the idea that some people are undeserving and that they are dangerous without measure. We have to recognize that criminalization is the thing that we're fighting. Incarceration is a symptom of criminalizing people. We need to decriminalize people because that's how we get ankle monitoring. Because if people are like, oh, if they're not in prison, if you could be home. And that's not ending slavery, that's sharecropping.
Okay, take it home. Take it. I gotta write that quote down. Point, Andrea. It's not
Shai, I want to address the question that you had. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing with the Sisters Inside. I don't know what your personal story is. If you just thank you for your work. If to answer your question, and I'm not saying this because we're the National Council, but yes, join the National Council because it's a platform of connectivity and support. We're all sisters deep in our hyper-local communities, but if you're looking for ideas and a place to experiment and to learn and share, that's a place where you can do it. And also, in your work, if you're not directly affected, formerly incarcerated, which everybody is directly affected, but please remember, regardless of that, to build leadership in our young, and to also make sure that you have a black woman leading the efforts that you're making, particularly with our sisters inside. The last thing I want to point out is that we talk about law enforcement and police. I know Nikita, but I got to tell the audience this. Attorney William Barr announces the launch of Operation Relentless Pursuit.
Lord have mercy.
The Department of Justice has just funded $71 million to just begin Operation Relentless Pursuit. This tells us all about what.
And this is
what
not
we're talking
new.
About. This is right now. When I was in
Religion
D.C.
to bring
2
them to
days ago,
justice. Remember
this
that?
was announced, and it is starting in 7 cities, which I don't believe it's starting everywhere, right? Where they are using this money to militarize police, and they're joining forces with every single federal, state, local law enforcement to descend upon our communities and do this Operation Relentless Pursuit.
So as we know, the struggle continues. Let's give it up for our panel: Cassandra, Danielle, Andrea, Jose, and James. Woo! Thank you.
So a real quick announcement. Our next panel starts at 11:20 sharp, and we humbly and kindly request that if you don't need to get up and leave the room, to please stay, stretch, but don't leave, so we can be as smooth and gracefully as possible. And please, the panel, please join us up the front.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, James. Love you. Oh, man.
Thank you so much. You're great
Thank
at this.
you.
You're great at this.
Great, everybody. That was amazing.
All my stuff. Wait a minute.
Well done, Ezra.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I didn't, but I'm glad you were.
Let me give you that. I got this coming out. All right. Yeah. Follow your footsteps.
Oh my goodness, this is gonna be exciting. When is it coming out?
In the fall.
In the fall. Okay, then it means we got a healthy.
Oh yeah. I'm